Greetings, friends. Operational situation at the front on the 16th of April. Today, we will talk about the whole front, and we will also talk at the end about the news background, interesting and important. But we will start with you from Seversky to the directions where active hostilities continue both in the area of Lugansk-Bologorovka and in the direction of the excavation along the railway. The enemy is putting the main military operations right now along the railway. The vector, we said, is very different. It changes periodically, and today we see how fresh footage is subsequently published, where attacks are also taking place northeast, east of the railway. The main emphasis is placed by the Russian troops on approximately this area. So far, without significant changes, again. Well, as it is, there are a lot of things that indicate that the goal is clearly set. To take a number of positions that are located to the north, that is, to take the height on this section of the front. Therefore, so far without any changes. As for Bologorovka-Lugansk, everything also remains within the gray zone. Well, now we turn to the Clock Yar. Bogdanovka. According to Bogdanovka itself, we have no significant changes, fighting with varying success, I would say so. I mean the more northerly part of it, the northern part. As for the Orlov Tract. The Orlov Tract, the situation here is quite complicated. I will speak directly. I think we'll have a more objective picture within 48 hours. Here we are talking not so much for the positions of the west or southwest of Bogdanovka, as in general. What we talked about yesterday's broadcast, when I told you that Russian troops are making further attempts to advance, including along the railway, that is, to bypass just the same, in order to a wider coverage, to attack the canal area. And due to this they need positions even in the Orlov Tract. And in general, it's still difficult to tell from the situation right now. There is conflicting information. Active hostilities continue. We have active military operations in this sector of the front. The enemy is conducting a lot of assault operations, now in small assault groups, about 5 to 7, sometimes 10 people. In other words, it's not like in the Avdiivka direction, 2 or 3, a little bigger. And here it should also be added that in some cases, sometimes even more of them are attacked than in the Avdiivka direction. Therefore, we continue active hostilities in this sector of the front with varying success. But the enemy clearly chose the same tactics here as a little to the south, when he managed to advance through the reserve of the Golyabovsky to concessions and thereby afford further advancement to the north. Well, we have the main fighting going on for the reserve, and, accordingly, for the Orlov Tract. The situation is similar for this forest area, along with the railway. The situation is quite complicated if we are talking about the northern flank. I think we will have it more or less visible within 48 hours. So far, very, very hard fights with varying success. But as for the north of Bogdanovka, let's say a little more here. It was possible to repel all attacks without changes. It was attacked in the direction of Kalinovka, and there were also attempts to advance into a small landing, north of Bogdanovka. Here also without changes, everything remained within the gray zone. As for the reserve of the Golyabovsky 2 mortars, without any new changes. According to Ivanovsky, the enemy published footage where it is reported that it is conducting artillery strikes on positions and probable positions in the buildings, the remaining buildings of the AFU, what it controls. Therefore, in fact, there are no significant changes here. But today, on the Russian side, despite the official statement of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation about allegedly full control over Ivanovsky, we see that the APU reserves a part under control. Therefore, the fighting in this sector of the front continues without any changes so far. Well, we are moving with you to the Avdiivka direction, where we have big changes. We will start, like the previous few days ago, and the previous broadcasts with the Garden Association Zarya. It was completely captured by Russian troops. They managed to approach the northwestern part of it to gain a foothold. Well, we talked about the attacks along the road yesterday. That there are two variants of development. First, they are promoted by the Garden Association. For those who missed last night's broadcast, I will voice it, but believe me, it's better to watch briefly to see what I voiced. Now I will briefly just voice it. So, the first option. We have said that they can advance along the Garden Association Zarya, and along the road where they attacked and landed troops. To advance in order to, first, align the front line, then Novobakhmutovka. But most likely, I said the second option, which I will voice. They approach here, take control of the intersection, and begin to press southward on the western part of Berdik. Unfortunately, the first option turned out to be fully implemented by the enemy. He went to the north, although he voiced both, but the second option was more likely for me. The current situation is as follows. Here, on a front section up to 2 kilometers wide, they advanced to a depth of 1 and 4 kilometers. The Dacha settlement came under control, as well as the positions north of the Gusyatnik rate. Here we have a small end of the forest belt. It went north of Berdyshe. In general, we conditionally say that now they are leveling the front line. Will they go to Novobakhmutovka? Well, now, I'll probably say that there will be a second option, the fact that we voiced the first one yesterday, which was unlikely. It turned out to be implemented. And the second one is in the direction of Berdik, with accounting. For some reason, I say taking into account the fact that in Semenovka, eastern Semenovka, the Russian troops managed to take positions on a site up to 115 kilometers wide to a depth of up to 400 meters. The current situation is as follows. And collectively, we understand that Berdyshe is now becoming the next settlement, because they will put pressure on it both from the south, in fact in the direction of the intersection of the western part, and have positions north of Berdiki. At the same time, the positions are already covered by the flank. Therefore, they have secured themselves from a flank counterattack for this period. Therefore, now the main battle will take place for Berdik from two directions. The situation is very complicated. Here it is necessary to speak collectively for the northern flank for Novokalinov, where the fighting continues. Although they are positional in nature, but still they allowed the enemy to disperse our forces as much as possible. Yes, and I said at the time that it might be distracting. Then the number of attacks increased. It no longer looks like a distraction, but at the same time, they made the main blow in the direction of Queuing, a country village. Therefore, we see that the enemy, due to numerical superiority, allows himself such maneuvers on the battlefield, and has tactical success due to this. Fierce fighting continues in this sector of the front. The situation remains complicated. It remains complicated. Moving on. As for the site, Thin Yasnobrodovka Vodian Human Pervomaiskoy, Natelovo, without significant changes. All the shots that were published by the APU from drones all remained in the red zone of the position of the Russian troops. So no changes were recorded. At the same time, there was an attempt to transfer additional forces from Donetsk to Pervomaisk along the road section. But it was possible to hit in Pervomaisk itself. Therefore, here for the time being, the enemy continues to accumulate forces in order to carry out assault actions. But I have not conducted any new activities to date on the 16th of April in the morning. We go further. Krasnogorovka. A week ago, we said that it takes a week to see a more or less objective picture of the situation yesterday. The day before yesterday, we talked for 48 hours. Yesterday, we said that today the picture will be more or less clear. It is already clear. Of course, we talked more with you for the two mainstays, which are most likely under the control of the enemy. Well, now let's look at the situation. It means that shots were published from the side of the AFU fighters were the HIMARS missile defense system. strikes the building of the railway, the Krasnogorovka railway station. Here, just the same, we have, I hope you can see on the screen, a railway passes. Well, in general, there was a position of the Russian troops there quite deeply, as we see. In other words, this is a promotion. A gray zone was added from the south. A gray zone with buildings in the southeast adjacent to Krasnogorovsky Dachas was added. Well, according to the changes. Here, they advanced in a section up to 1 kilometer wide to a depth of 1 kilometer. Two supports came under enemy control, and accordingly, it has gained a foothold in the southeast of the Krasnogorsk Dachas. The current situation is as follows. Fighting continues with varying success just on the territory of Krasnogorsk Dachas, in the construction of two-story houses on the southeastern outskirts of Krasnogorskavka, and in the southern part of Krasnogorskavka as well, where we have a private sector and a railway station. As we can see, the enemy is making a lot of attempts to break through, advance, and impose an urban type of battle. It's still difficult to talk right now. I told you then that it is difficult to predict anything, because for the enemy, this is a very important goal. That will allow him to start one more battle. In fact, the battle is like an hour in the Yar, where the Afu fighters are already voiced. Yes, as for the hour in Yar, it will be very resource-intensive. We need artillery, we need more drones. In other words, you need to understand what an urban type of battle is. This is a very, very difficult, fierce thing. Close-range shooting battles. Well, actually Krasnogorka has a similar situation. The enemy is trying to impose the Apu, I can tell from the messages that I see and read. They are doing everything that is possible and impossible to avoid, in order to stabilize at least relatively the situation here before receiving, at least until the period of receiving assistance in the form of the Czech ammunition initiative. We will talk about this in the end, so that, well, now there is at least some kind of relative stabilization. So that there is not what the enemy wants. Impose another urban type of combat. Because remember what happened during the battle for Bakhmut, and now there are actually two, maybe two battles at the same time. Therefore, the situation remains difficult. I would say it is difficult. Time will tell. Moving on. Novomikhailovka. There were several attacks in the area of Novomikhailovka managed to repel without any changes. The Ugledar direction. Here, the enemy has launched a large-scale offensive in the direction of, so far, let's say conditionally, Ugledar. There is still a mine here, I gave a forecast for it. The Yuzhno Donbass mine is number 1, which most likely will try to bypass Lidar in the direction of this mine. Well, in general, there is a vector, but I assumed. I didn't voice where they would attack from. I assumed that they would be from Nikolsky, but there is an attack vector from Sweet. So, there was an attempt with the support of more than 10 armored vehicles. I have the full video in the Telegram channel. You can go see it. The attack was repelled. 1 tank was destroyed there, 3 tanks were shot down, 2 empty Elb. Destroy us. Another evacuation motorcycle is hit, destroyed, or rather, destroyed by a drone. In general, we managed to repel this attack, but we see that the Ugledar direction also remains potential for the enemy. Here he used, well, if we talk about the situation in the Novomikhailovka area, this is a considerable amount of equipment, because he has a hot front, a hot section of the front in the form of Novomikhailovka, but nevertheless, he tried to reverse the situation in the Ugledar direction. Therefore, you can watch the full video, it's clearer there. The shots that are there cannot be put on YouTube, but without changing the situation. In any case, I predicted that by the end of May, we will see an activation in the Ugledar direction. This was precisely due to my vision, that they would continue active assault operations through May from the beginning of the year, and, accordingly, due to numerical superiority, they would be active in a number of areas that go into so-called hibernation, absolute positivity. Well, it should be noted that the APU was ready after a fairly long period to repel this attack. The Novoselkov direction is great. Yesterday, we talked about him, that there are attacks in the direction of Staromayorsky and in the direction of Harvest. To date, after my evening broadcast, there was information about the advance of Russian troops in this sector of the front, in the direction of Staromayorsky. Here, they managed to advance along the road in the direction of the settlement itself, the village on a section of width. On a section of width up to a total of 700 meters in total, to a depth of 600 meters was an advance. The situation for yesterday, the situation for today. We continue active military operations, both in the direction of the village of Staromayorskoye and in the direction of the village of Urozhnoye, where Russian troops are making further attempts to advance with small assault groups. The vectors are also different, they attack from several directions. So far, all of this, if we speak for the Harvest, is positional in nature without changes. But a big bet, probably still needs to be said, is being made on Staromayorsko on their part, which would then allow them to put more pressure on the Harvest. Here, the crop has a specific topographic location, unprofitable for an offensive by Russian troops. But as for Staromayorsky, the topographic component is a little more complicated here. The enemy has a number of advantageous positions. Well, the APU, respectively, also has a number of advantageous positions and heights. Moving on. Zaporozhye section of the front. The fighting continues, active in the southern part of the country, to date. We do not record any significant changes in the settlement. The fighting remains positional in nature, and the assault operations in the southern part work for us. Well, now I will comment on the news background for you.